The downside is that Don Gordon mobilized a lot of people. There was a huge anti-Joe Moore sentiment in the ward. I mean, obviously enough to force him into a runoff. And I think he only ended up winning the runoff election by, like, it was some really small, like maybe 300 votes or something. So he had like 51% maybe, so he just barely won, which he took as a wake-up call. But Don Gordon was really playing to this anti-Joe Moore sentiment, and a lot of the people that worked for his campaign, and even some of the people who worked for our campaign, were basically under this banner of anybody but Joe Moore. Now, by Jim then endorsing Joe Moore, all these people who were anybody but Joe Moore got very agitated and upset with Jim. So it was kind of this polarization of pro and anti-Joe Moore forces that still pretty much exists today. Where that especially comes into play there are two bloggers, Tom Manis, who does the Chicago News Bench, formerly the Rogers Park Bench, and Craig Gernhardt, who is of the Broken Heart of Rogers Park, also known as the Morse Hellhole, by his own naming. And they were both, Manis worked for us actually as a volunteer, and Gernhardt was always behind Gordon.
Would you mind writing their names down, please?
Yeah.
Erase what you need to.
Craig Gernhardt and Tom, and I think it's two N's, M-A-N-N-I-S.
And Tom is the one you said used to work with you guys?
He was a volunteer on our campaign. He's a funny guy, literally and figuratively. And he was very fond of us up until the point where Jim supported Joe Moore, and then he became probably Jim's biggest attacker.
Wow.
And they're both bloggers.
What's that?
They're both bloggers.
They're both bloggers.
For which blog?
Tom Manis is the Chicago News Bench.
Okay.
It was an oddity when it was the Rogers Park Bench because it's extremely right-wing.
Okay.
It was probably our mistake to accept the services of someone who was that right-wing, since we are not right-wing.
What do you identify as?
We're liberal Democrat. I'm probably even beyond liberal. But,
Okay.
but I'm willing to sit down and talk politics with anyone who's
Yeah.
spending, as long as they're reasonable.
Absolutely.
He ended up, I mean, he's probably, if you look at his site, I haven't in a while, but I would guess he's probably a huge teabagger at this point. He always, well, after we started working with him, I know he posted some really nasty anti-immigrant stuff, which I would not have supported if he did it when he was working with us. He's also, after, obviously Obama wasn't running at that point, but he was pretty good at attacking Obama during the general election. Gernhardt claims to be a Democrat, but his politics, I think, are pretty conservative. And he's it's called the Morse, I think it's all one word, morsehellhole.blogspot. If you Google it, Morse Hellhole, or he also calls it the Broken Heart of Rogers Park. Morse is the name of one of the big streets in Rogers Park. It's the L station up there. And it's getting better now. At one point it was pretty blighted. A lot of businesses were shut down. There's still some drug dealing that goes on at the L stop there in off hours, but that's why he named it the Morse Hellhole. But both of them are very negative. I mean, if you look at the site, you'll see they're usually over the top. They started accusing Jim of being a heroin addict as one example, which is completely out of the blue and had no basis in fact. But because we can get into the discussion of public figures, I'm sure John has talked to you about that before, but running for office, you automatically become a public figure, and basically your ability to counter legally anything anyone says online is very difficult. So you can't really sue someone for libel because they're protected by this public figure clause.
Got it. Okay. I remember that.
So anyway, what all this leads up to is soon after the election, out of some strange fluke circumstances, the Boys and Girls Club actually became a very strong reality or possibility, because there was this Boys and Girls Club based, I think, in the Lathrop Homes that was going to have to move because the Lathrop Homes was being shut down. So they actually, a couple of their board members lived in Rogers Park and knew Jim was pushing it, and they set up a meeting with Jim to explore the possibility of putting the Boys and Girls Club, their Boys and Girls Club, in Rogers Park. What it turned out, they decided, and Jim decided, and everyone decided, was the best location for it would be this brand new park facility, Chicago Park District facility that had just been built, not yet quite open, in Rogers Park, called the, at the point then it was the Gale Community Center, now it's the Willie White Field House. And I could give you that, but Willie, I think it's spelled strange, like W-I-L-L-Y-E. Willie, I think B. White. You can look it up. She was an Olympic athlete.
Oh, wait, okay.
It's called the Willie B. White.
Field House, I believe. It's in Gale Park, which is why it was originally called the Gale Community Center, and then they dedicated it to Willie White afterwards. If you actually go to the Urban Coasters site, I know I wrote a story about who Willie B. White was, so you can, it wasn't much of a story, it was just basically looking up stuff that's available on the web about her. But she was an Olympic athlete, I think she was a medalist. She was also very active in Chicago community organizing,
Okay.
so she was a good choice. She wasn't originally from Chicago, but she moved to Chicago and got very active in, especially like using athletics to help kids out and to improving their lives. So there started being meetings between Jim and the Park District and this group from Lathrop Homes to kind of see what the possibility was to build this Boys and Girls Club. And eventually they came to a decision that this would be a good thing, that it would work. They worked out some different details where everybody was basically pretty happy to kind of explore the next step. The hang-up came because the way park districts in Chicago work, you have an advisory council, Park District Advisory Council, attached to every park district. And the people who were basically the players behind the Gale Park Advisory Council were extremely anti-Joe Moore, and several of them were prominent members of the Don Gordon campaign. So basically, they wanted to see the project killed at any cost, because if it got passed, it would be another feather in Joe Moore's cap. So what they did is basically they organized, they tried to organize different ways to get people to oppose it. They claimed that there was a backroom deal made between the Park District and Joe Moore that cut out the community, cut out the advisory council, and didn't let them have any input, which was false, because all there was a meeting to see if it was worth pursuing, and then Joe Moore brought this to the community council and brought this and had public meetings in the community to discuss it, to see how it might best work for the community. The bottom line was that the Boys and Girls Club was willing to come into Rogers Park, provide all this programming that wasn't there before.
Yeah.
The Boys and Girls Club, the way it works is that, excuse me, is that you have basically an annual fee that every member pays, and then you have access to all their programming.
Okay.
The way the Park District works is you have to pay per program.
Okay.
So the cost of participating in Park District programs is much higher
Got it.
to the consumer or the user than the Boys and Girls Club would allow, because they do a lot of fundraising. They're a national organization, so they have access to a lot of funds, but they also kind of mobilize their membership to do the fundraising and kind of build the programs.